Hey everyone, Matt Pisarcik with RazorEmporium.com. Today to talk with you about brush restoration. So maybe you found an old vintage brush in grandfather's possessions, maybe you got one at a thrift store, antique store, but either way, you want to get it back into working condition, you want to be able to actually shave with it, and in today's video, we're going to show you how to do that. For the first step, I always just kind of like to do a general assessment of my work in front of me. So I'm looking to see that the knot is going to need to be taken out. I can see that the handle has some pretty gnarly scratches and dings and dents. It's going to need to be polished. And I can also see that we're going to have to replace the knot and fill in the letters with some new gold leaf rub and buff. So let's get started on this. Step one is we're going to actually use a pair of shears and just cut out the old knot. There's no safer, no faster way to do it than just to take a nice oversized pair of shears that are sharp and cut off all the old hair. In the past, we've tried using a bandsaw to be fancy, and it ended up being more trouble and more dangerous than it's worth. So be advised, just a big pair of shears work great. Step two, we've always found that taking the kind of stump of the old hair to a sander to kind of get more of a flat, uniform surface makes for a much easier process in the actual base knot removal. So we are flattening the stump on a belt grinder here, get it nice and even. Step three is we're going to come over to our drill press and load it with a properly sized Forstner bit. In this case, we have a 3/4 inch Forstner bit that fit the socket relatively similar. You want to make sure that the Forstner bit is not going to do any damage to the socket or the surrounding area of the brush. So I always kind of take a quick minute to rotate by hand the chuck of the drill press and actually kind of imagine its path it's going to take and make sure it's not going to scratch or ding or dent the edge of the brush. If you're not careful with this step, you can actually shatter or damage the brush, and that's going to be a tragedy. So always double check your work before you turn on the drill. So now that we have our brush safely clamped with a plastic clamp that's going to hold it as we're performing this procedure, we can lower the drill press and start to grind out all of the original stump. So while using your Forstner bit and your drill press, you're going to want to make sure you go down at least 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch, and give enough room so that your base of the knot is completely inside of the brush handle, and you don't want to see a little bit of the glue base sticking up after the restoration is done. That's kind of a sign that somebody didn't know what they were doing. And going the proper depth is very important. If you go too deep, you're going to end up with a brush that's kind of arbitrarily squeezed and pushing all the hair up, and it's going to become a lot stiffer. And obviously, like I just said, too loose, you're going to end up seeing the kind of like a little thin glue line. So now that we have our socket all cleaned up, we are going to go over to a polishing motor here and actually start removing all the scratches, dings, and dents that this brush has gone through after years and years of being handled and dropped and moved around. So we're using a large 10-inch cotton wheel with some different polishing compounds and actually removing all this. Now, most vintage brushes you're going to come across are plastic, and using the proper polishing compound and a cotton wheel, you can actually do a fair amount of safe metal removal. If you have deep gouges or deep scratches, you may want to sand the area first with a very high grit sandpaper, like maybe a 320 or 400, to actually remove a lot more plastic at once. And then you can go ahead and polish it out. Dremel tools can also be used for this procedure, but I would just advise you that anytime you have a small wheel that's rotating, you have a lot higher likelihood of making divots. That's why we're using a 10-inch cotton buffing wheel, because the radius of that wheel is not very likely to leave a divot mark. So be very careful using a Dremel. Now that our brush is all cleaned up, we are actually going to take it over to our ultrasonic machine and now remove all the polishing compound and kind of just give it a real good general cleaning. We have our ultrasonic loaded with a polishing compound remover chemical that does a great job of taking away a lot of the polishing dirt and grime. If you don't have one of these machines, you could always use a toothbrush and some dish detergent and hot water. You'll be amazed how effective that is. So we've just taken the brush handle out of the ultrasonic cleaner. It's a perfect time to measure the socket and get an order in for a new replacement knot. Now, Each customer has different preferences. Maybe they want a synthetic knot, a boar's hair, a badger, what kind of badger. So because of that reason, the price of the knot is not included in the restoration service, and it's completely up to you. And we can work with you to tell you different prices from some very common and popular suppliers of knots, and then we'll just invoice you for that dollar amount, and we'll move on and get it ordered in and get it installed for you. So now that our replacement knot has arrived, it's the time to get it installed. And to do that, we're going to use my favorite product, 2-part epoxy, marine grade. That means that it's safe around water, and that over time of being covered in soap and hot soapy water, it's not going to loosen up and have the knot just fall out on you. Be sure to use a smaller amount of epoxy than you think is needed. You can always add more. I know it sounds crazy, but you can kind of twist and get the knot out of there if there's not enough. But taking away excess epoxy is usually messy and may result in damaging the plastic if it does get stuck on there. Then you're trying to work to get that polished away or cleaned off. So always go on the safer side and use a sparing amount of epoxy because it will expand as you put the knot down inside. Leave your brush for up to 24 hours in a safe place so that the epoxy can fully cure, and you can be assured that the knot won't drop out as you're doing the next and final step. So we like to use a product called Rub and Buff. You can get it at most hobby stores. It's applied by hand. You can use a toothpick or Q-tip, but either way, you're trying to get this to go into the original letters, and then you can use a cotton towel or paper towel to buff off the remaining. This will kind of fill in all of the original manufacturer's writing, manufacturer's maker's mark, brand name, all of that, so that the brush is brought back to its original glory. So that's it. You've seen a complete brush restoration from start to finish. There is something so satisfactory about using an old vintage brush. I mean, not only can you do the wet shaving, the old school kind of shave thing, but to use an old brush, maybe it was grandfather's, maybe it was dad's, brings a whole new level of value and a whole new level of meaning to this experience. If you have any questions or if you need help with this, we offer services like this all the time. We do lots of them in our shop every month. We're happy to help out. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and let us know if you've done any of these brush restorations yourself. If you have any questions or any tips that we didn't cover, I want to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.